Hello, this is Wayne Kurtz, your Chief Goals Officer, for a tip for you for next week to consider. And as we go into the weekend, one skill I think we all know about a lot and we think about it, I think in a lot of conversation, is really the goal of listening. And this can happen in anything. It can be in business, it can be just in general communication. I know for myself personally, it's been a skill that you kind of take for granted, and we all love to hear ourselves talk, just like anyone else. And I think if you go into next week, a couple things I wrote down in terms of improving your listening skills, and I picked up a couple ideas actually at a meeting I was at this past week. The first is, for those of you who are in a function or meeting someone for the first time, and say it's a business card exchange, a networking event, of course the common thing is to grab a business card. I don't have one here handy, but grabbing a business card, and you try to really remember someone's name, not only their name, but if they don't have a card, you try to write down a description or something of that nature, and some key points. Listen to what they're talking about, see if there are some similarities, and what do you remember the most about the conversation. The one thing I learned the other day, a friend mentioned to me that he does, and I like the idea, is when you receive a business card, the normal is sometimes you turn it over, or you might have an index card like this. I think it's always helpful if someone doesn't have a business card and you don't want to pull out your iPhone and type in all the information. That's the other way. But when you're really listening to someone, write down, of course, some of the information on an index card. It looks professional, and you just slide it in your jacket or your pocket. But the other idea is if someone gives you a business card, the normal is you flip it over and you might write a couple points on it. Ask them for permission. You'd be surprised how valuable that is, where you just ask someone, hey, would you mind if I actually wrote on the back of your business card a couple things? You mentioned your kids play soccer, whatever it might be. And you'll see what the reaction is, because you're kind of asking them. So think about that as you're listening when you're meeting people. And I wrote down a couple things to consider as well. One as an example is, I think more than anything else, is just to focus on being quiet. Just focus on the individual, and you really think of it as you're now thinking of your mind as a computer, and you're putting these different components in small little file folders. And that's the way I've kind of done it. And you go from there and you think of, as you're listening, what questions do you have? Are there any questions that might come up? If you don't have a chance to jot them down, just put one little note down. But really listening and focusing on those key points will address important questions. A couple other ones I thought is to focus on the key points and be purposeful in your listening. And I give a good example of this is, for those of you who are runners, you know that I run, and I'm sure there's plenty of you that are in the space that are running and working out. And if you walk, for instance, there is a difference between walking with purpose, and for those of you who race and you have a bad race and you end up having to walk part of whatever the running distance is, you can get into a mode where you're walking relatively slow, especially in a long race, where there's not a lot of purpose or intuition behind the walk. So when you're listening next week, really focus on it and make it purposeful when you're listening. And the most important final things are, as you're listening through and really understanding some of the key points and you're generating questions, of course, timing is always the key. When do you pull the trigger to, at that point, after the individual is done talking, to ask those pinpointed questions and act on it? And I think a lot of times, I know I do, and individuals I've seen just in general, will jump in the middle. Someone's halfway through a sentence, and they're getting cut off, and you have to circle them back through. So a lot of common sense things, but there's not a whole lot written on listening, but it is a skill you can develop by just developing your own mentality when you're meeting people, and be purposeful with it. So try that next week, and think of it as running as well. So purposeful walking, purposeful listening, and you'd be surprised. You look at the business leaders today, and most of them are very good listeners. So tips for the week next week, and enjoy the weekend. Thanks.